Greg, that's been a tremendous overview of what you did in Mozambique in the southeast of the country and in the Russian front area of Propulse. But I think we're going to move on to your experiences in Op Snoopy now. That's SNOOPY. And for our international viewers, it was one of the first responses to the Viscount that was shot down. RH285 was the first or second Viscount that was shot down. And the Rhodesian government decided to hit back, which they eventually did in Zambia and Mozambique. And Op Snoopy is one of these raids. It covered a large area near Chimoio, and it involved quite a large Rhodesian contingent on the ground and in the air. And you were part of it, Greg, so I'd love to hear your story.
Right. We were briefed that this was going to be a base attack. They knew that there were quite a few thousand Zanla operatives in the area. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to go in with the bombers and bomb it. Intelligence reports from intelligence, the Air Force and the Zulu Scouts had pinpointed where it was between two mountains in the valley below, and there was a dry riverbed which was on the southern side. And we would make up part of the team that went in to attack the base. Attack is a bit of a misnomer because they really wanted, what they wanted to do was to strafe it and bomb it. And we would then be the stopper groups. The Zulu Scouts were operational in the area. They did not have enough men at this stage. Obviously, guys were allocated to some of the other operations. We had some of the C Squadron guys with us, but it would be us and D Squadron, and then a para-wing of the RLI as well that would be involved as stoppers, the stopper group. So primarily on the southwestern side and the southeast, a bit of a bow like this along the river, where the mountains were on the east and the west. I'm simplifying it, but that's primarily what it was.
It's roughly 75 kilometers east of the current town of Matari on the east of Zimbabwe. Correct. Just to give people an orientation. Yeah.
And it's a bit of mixed bushveld. So there's the Mopani trees, and on the riverbed where the rivers do run during most of the rain season, there are bigger trees there. So you would find that there must be wild figs or something else like that, and quite large trees. And we would then be dropped. They normally say a height of 800 feet. So the first team to be dropped would be D Squadron, then it would be C Squadron, then be us in A Squadron, then the RLI on that side. So the DACs would just come in, just fly like it. So there were three of them. They told us more or less what we were going to do. We've got to intercept any of the guys coming in. It was a mop-up operation after the op. And obviously, kills are important, but if we could capture anybody, even more important, because information was vital. So we would have to wait for the bombers to go in, which they did. At this stage, we were airborne. We took off from Buffalo Range. I think the others took off from ourselves and the RLI took off from Buffalo Range. I think C Squadron took off from Umtali, if I'm correct. I'm not sure. My memory is a bit vague about that at the moment. Anyway, so we were all airborne at this stage, and we were waiting, and then we could hear the bombers going over, doing their thing, and they said, "Okay, guys, get ready, stand in the door, go." 800 foot. It's more like 400 foot, and you still got gommels and other things in between. They told us that when we went out, it would be like a day operation. We'd go in, and this was sort of mid-morning. We would go through the base, cleaned up, and so on. We picked up last light to exfiltrate. And so we didn't need to carry that much kit, but I'm the radio operator. I was reporting into Captain Connie van Wyk, who was later killed in operations. And I was still green. You know, even though we'd done other ops and so on, you learn something very quickly. You are green. The guys who've been doing it for a long, long time also are conservative, because you never want to be the loudmouth, the braggart, anything like that. So I had the only guy with the backpack, but because I had the backpack, what could I carry? Extra mortar bombs. So they give me the mortar bombs to carry. I had extra water and I had to carry extra batteries. So now I've got the HF radio. I I got to stick to our commander for the duration of the operation. So I got to be like his shadow because I'm going to have the radio with him. Didn't happen in when we jumped from the plane. We got separated and he ended up somewhere else. So at that low height, you think, well, you should be a sequence in which you dropped out. I don't know what happened to him, but he ended up being closer to C Squadron. I came down and I thought I'm going to land in a nice open area next to some big trees, next to this deep donga or dry riverbed. Ashton picks the right place. I land in the biggest tree you can imagine, and I crash to the trees, and there I am. I hadn't released my kit because normally what you want to do just before you get to the ground, you release your kit on the rope so that and then you keep it on your feet, and just before you land, you drop it. So you don't get that oscillating movement. In the old days, it was great. Drop it off, you let it hang, but in the bush, you hang it on your feet until you close the ground, and about a second before you hit the ground, you let it go, so it doesn't fall very hard either. I'm hanging in the tree, like I don't know what type of fruit, but I'm sitting up there and I'm feeling very vulnerable. So I have my, I think we were jumping with FNs at that stage, but it was strapped to me because of your body strap on your parachute harness. So it's strapped to me here, and all I've got is my pistol on this side, which is a Browning high power. It was my weapon of choice, which I always carried. And so I pull it out because I'm not expecting guys to be running underneath you. You can hear stuff going on where they've been dropping bombs and so on. And then it was quiet and nothing. Now expecting hordes of guys to come running through. And here I'm sitting in a tree quite high up. Now, when I say high up, I was at least where I was dangling. I was over the riverbed and the tree was on the bank like this. And there was a drop of at least 3 to 4 meters between the riverbank and the tree. I was still another 8 meters or so up, quite high, hanging in the middle of nothing else.
Good.
Now I'm expecting, so I've got my pistol out waiting. I could hear some of the other guys calling because the brief was, once you've landed, dump your parachute, form up, line up, and then move forward. And I could hear guys calling. There were other guys snagged in trees, but not as big as mine, and they got out quickly. And I couldn't get down, and I was sitting there ready to be picked off by anybody who came through, because you're not going to do much with a pistol, first of all. Secondly, you're stuck in that position. You can't really swing around in your harness. Feeling very vulnerable. I thought I've got to get out here as quick as possible. But I cannot drop my kit because my radio's in it, and if I drop it, it's again. So what did I do? I held onto the radio, clipped it back onto my harness, released my reserve parachute, dropped it down, filled it down as long as it would go. And then I unhooked the radio, got out of the harness, and I slid down the parachute to where the rigging lines join the canopy. Then when you get to the canopy, it's not, well, it's longish, but I would say maybe 3 or 4 meters of canopy. And when you in that canopy and holding onto that material is very, very slippery. But at least it broke my fall. So I only had about 4 meters to drop to the ground. But we formed up. I eventually caught up with the guys who were quite far ahead. Connie van Wyk was off to the left. I eventually joined up with him. We started walking. We didn't see one Zanlatur, not one.
Are you joking, really?
Some guys did come running through far to on the eastern side, on the southeast side there. We caught with the RLI. And I think somebody might have gone through where C Squadron was. I'm not sure. But I remember we just didn't see anything. There were signs of it, but nothing. And we're walking through bush, and then we see open areas. We walked through. They said, no, guys, we've got to go through and walk up the hill. We started walking up the hill, and then traces that set fire to elephant grass. So people don't know elephant grass. It's very tall. It's quite thick. It's like reed-like in construction, but it's thick. It's mostly about as thick as my finger. But it's tall. So it must be about 3-4 meters tall. And it's dry season, and the stuff had caught fire. And we had a massive fire coming our way. The wind was blowing it this way. So we had to evade this and move around. A great opportunity for anybody who wants to take pot shots at guys in disarray like this, because you're trying to avoid fire. And the heat and the smoke is unbearable. Anyway, moved around, moved up the hill. And as we're going up, it's all burnt out. The whole hill is burnt out. We're walking, finding a way. It's very rocky, finding a way. And we're more or less walking single file because it's the only way to get up there. Get near to the top, and here was the first difference between the South Africans and the Rhodesians. 11 o'clock, tea time, guys. Guys sitting there brewing their tea, sitting down there, drinking it. You know, the Rhodesian way of making tea, you put your Tanganda tea bags into it, and you boil the crap out of it until it's really, really strong. Throw in your milk and so on and some sugar, and then you drink it. But I mean, really strong stuff. So the guys were all up there. So we met up, and then based on our instructions, our brief was to go ahead some more and then sweep around in a clockwise, and then come around to the bottom of the base, but go around the hill, which we did. We came around the hill, and there was some remnants of a bomb that had dropped there. And I stand corrected, but one of those bouncing golf ball bombs had gone off in that area, and there had been some guys from Squadron who'd been up there. The bomb had been dropped erroneously on the wrong place, and these guys were quite badly injured. I think the one guy died at a later stage. I don't recall. But when you go up there and you see massive trees, Kia trees, Mopani trees, and things like that, cut off at about waist height, because that golf ball bomb bounces, goes up, and then it explodes, and it just cut everything off in that area. So the area about the size of half of a rugby field, there was just more or less nothing left there. And then, of course, the earth is badly scorched, and there's a lot of cordite and stuff that been burnt. Anyway, we crossed over the hill, went around on the eastern side of the hill, and there it was quite bushy. And as we're coming around the corner, I was quite far to the back, most probably about 2/3 of the way to the back, and the guys were walking. We're walking sort of extended line, but turned sideways, sort of nearly walking extended line, but diagonally. And we walked into some trenches, and there were a whole lot of the enemy in there, and they opened fire on us, but they couldn't shoot. So we went into fire and movement. We killed everybody that was there. We threw grenades. We moved forward. Our fire movement was very aggressive, and will come out when I talk about Ops Urick at a later stage. And before we knew it, we were through the trenches. We'd eliminated the enemy. I don't think Zandler was prepared for this. I mean, we were just so hungry for this. We lost one of our guys, Mac van der Merwe. He'd been injured sometime back in a parachute accident. I'm going back about a year and a half, and he'd broken some of the vertebrae in his lower back. He'd been in harness and undergoing rehabilitation. First operation out, and he was behind a tree, and a guy saw him and shot him on the side tree, and it was nearly instantaneous. He went down. So that put quite a bit of a damper on it. But we then had to pick up his body in a ground sheet, which we made a temporary bush, what do you call it, stretcher. And we carried him down with us to the lower area, which seemed to be open, which we thought was the admin area. So the guys went ahead, scouted a bit, came back, said, it's fine, we can go down there, carry the body down, put it to one side, just made sure that it was fine and so on. We covered him. And the guy said, we need to sweep the area. And the area that we were in had a lot of caches of everything you can imagine. So one had medical supplies. There were a lot with food in. There was some that had water and booze, mostly beer. Ammunition caches. Now, a cache is not something which is stacked on the ground here. Here they dig into the ground. I would say it's 2 to 3 meters deep. Has an entrance, which you sort of step down into it. They use big poles from the local trees, which they cover, put it down, then they cover it with soil and leaves and so on. So from the aerial photograph, we won't necessarily pick it up, but they are there. And when we came across the food, like, that's when you get angry. So in those days, all the European countries were supporting the freedom movement. So you come across wonderful pickled ham in tin this. Beautiful stuff, but it's left out in the open, and you pop that tin, and it goes, and smell which comes from it. And rice, there was a lot of other stuff there that was just lying there. So
Norwegian salmon, really classy stuff that we would have killed for in Rhodesia.
There wasn't, and what do these guys mostly want to eat? Mealie meal. So there was some, and there was a separate cache, there was a whole lot of bags and bags and bags of this stuff. But obviously it's an acquired taste, I think, for them, or maybe the high-ranking officers were eating this stuff. But there was a lot of it. Stuff that I'd only heard of. Pickled herring, and you name all kinds of things, and pickled fruit and things like that. Anyway, so we went through all of this stuff, and the guys decided we got to blow all this up. So now I'm right on the end, on the sort of southeastern side at the bottom. I'm the guy there with Skulk Fourie. I've got my backpack on at the moment because I've got the radio, and Captain Connie van Wyk, who's a bit ahead, is busy coordinating. He said, stay here, set up comms for radio and so on. I'll be back now. But they're going to start blowing up all the caches. So the guys start laying charges and blowing up the ones. The one closest to us, which the guys didn't check, they just said that's also ammo. Wasn't ammo. Was the local latrine or toilet. when that thing went off, they talk about shit in the air. It was brown, and it was raining brown stuff. We were covered in the stuff. It just came raining down on it.
Yeah.
Quite a nasty surprise, eh? You know, I mean, we tired already. We covered in. Our eyes are red from all the smoke. We thirsty. There's not enough water and so on. My water supplies were nearly done, and so were the other guys. Now, to contend with this, we got all this stuff over us. That hadn't happened when all of a sudden the Zonla guys had obviously moved in and opened fire on us, and we just came under this barrage of fire. I just remember running because where I was, the soil around me looked like it was raining. I wasn't hit, but I dived for cover. But I have this heavy radio on me, and I dived into it with a lot of sand, with a kit and everything on my back. My friend Skulk said to me, I looked like a tortoise in the sand because I couldn't move. All you could see my hands doing this, trying to get out. Anyway, I crawled to the tree behind there. My handset from my radio got snagged on a tree and came back, hit me on the eye over here, and split up in my eye. So I had blood running down here. I just remembered, you don't know these things until they took a photograph when we went out, and I had this streak. I looked like a cheetah on the one side. Anyway, so we took cover there, and so the guys called the Air Force on the HF radio, said, we've got a problem. We need to send in. We haven't got enough firepower. So we think, well, it's going to be, some of the bigger stuff that comes in. 2 lynxes.
Little mosquito, push pull, yeah.
Yeah, and what they were carrying those little silver canisters underneath, which is a napalm copy that they were using. And they came in to drop the stuff, and they dropped it south of us, and they weren't on target because they don't want to hit us either. But I mean, you see the big balls of flame and so on going up. And soon the firepower diminished it, and the guys left. But when the planes came in, they all turned their attention to these planes. And the firepower that was meted out against these planes was unbelievable. You just hear this volume of fire. And the guys don't know how to preempt a plane flying and fire ahead of us. So they're firing at us. So they obviously were missing the plane mostly. I happened to bump into one of the pilots a few days later. We were at Salisbury. I was at the airbase, and I saw the lynxes there. And I walked up and I asked the pilot, "Were you one of the guys there?" He said, "Yes, we were." I said, "So, does your plane have any holes in it?" I didn't think they were going to come back. He said, "Yeah, I've got like 68 holes in my plane, but mostly in sort of the tail end of the plane. Some in the wings and a bit in the fuselage, but mostly towards the tail end." He said, "No, it often happens." Anyway, so the guys then pulled out, and we thought, okay, well, it's just time to leave. We got water supply came in. They dropped off water for us, these long black plastic bags. At least the guys had water, and they said, "Guys, sorry, it's too late." Sorry, my dog's barking. It was too late. They can't evacuate us now and collect us by helicopter. They're going to have to come early the next morning. We're going to have to stay the night. So thought, okay, it's just one of those things. We're going to stay the night. So we bedded down. We didn't really have much food or so on to share. We had some energy bars, a bit of water, and some guys made some tea or coffee, and that was about it. About 9 o'clock, now we're in an all-round defensive position. So we on our own side, we knew that the scouts were causing trouble elsewhere. We didn't know where they had been in the area. C Squadron was off elsewhere. We were the only guys that really in the camp itself, and the guys from the para wing of the RLI were quite far to the west where it was quiet. But everybody's in their all-round defensive positions. We're sitting in an area where it's all been burnt out. It's got these thin mopani trees and so on around us. At about 8:30 that evening, you start hearing noise of engines. And they start getting closer and closer and closer. These were T-76 tanks that they had and some BRDMs, and they decided to move into the area. They were going to come and teach us a lesson. They came in close to where we were. So we were slightly in a bit of dead ground, which we were lucky. They were on higher ground. The turrets on the T-76, the BRDMs, I don't think they can't go down enough. So they started opening fire, and they were firing over our heads. Big guns. So T-76, I think, is, I don't know what caliber it is, but it's really a big boy. When they think of kaboom, the ground shakes. They did a few shots like that, and then the 12,7s that were mounted on the top of that, they opened fire with just over us. They were obviously trying to get a response, like in previous operations, and we just lay there. So here's a guy.
Were those tracked vehicles, or because a tracked vehicle would be a tank, but the BDRMs had wheels, didn't they?
Some of them had wheels, some were half track.
Okay.
So while we know that the scouts took out one of the BRDMs, but it wasn't the half track, it was the wheeled version. What they had done, they'd taken a claymore mine on the road and they put an overhanging branch on the tree. And they sat there with a detonating mechanism and so on. And when the BRDM drove through underneath it, they hit the kill switch and it eliminated everybody because the top of the BRDM is open. So that was really nice. You know, you hear these reports in between and everybody sort of cheered. It was really nice. Anyway, so here's old Greenie, old Ashton. And this is now, it's been quite an exciting thing. Now, all of a sudden, you've got these tanks coming close and doing this. I'm hiding behind a tree, which is about this wide. I mean, my body's a little bit wider than this. But the anticipation, I've never dealt with tanks before or BRDMs or anything like that. I thought I was getting cold, but I think it's fear and adrenaline in your body when my teeth were chattering. I couldn't stop chattering, and I was trying to talk to the other guy the whole time like it. It was like that for about half an hour or so, and then I think your body gets used to it, and the adrenaline sort of wears off, and it stops, and it was fine. And the guys came close. We could hear them. So I reckon in the dark, it felt like they were 20 meters away. I reckon they were like 70, 80 meters away from us. And they persisted with this activity and trying to elicit some response or trying to do some damage. And then they turned around and left. The next day, we had to go back and do mop-up operations to clean up everything else that we need to do. Pretty uneventful. There were no Zunla soldiers in the area at all. And then sort of after 2 in the afternoon, they said, okay, guys, we're going to fly out. So we flew out in Bell. They had all the helicopters there. They had the Bell, and they obviously had the Alouettes. And there were 1 or 2 slightly bigger helicopters there called the Puma. Yep. We wondered how those had come in, but they had no markings on them, just the camouflage. There was nothing else on them.
Yeah.
And I remember flying back. We flew to Umtali, in the direction of Umtali, but we actually went higher up, so more towards Inyanga, so up on the top. And I remember looking out the window, because sitting in the door, sitting in the door, looking out, and all these helicopters flying back in the last afternoon sun. Very reminiscent of that scene from Apocalypse Now, where all those helicopters come in to do the base. Just amazing. And you know, what you feel, it's just unbelievable. So it's one of those things when I think about Rhodesia, it's one of the things that I think of. It's just amazing, all these helicopters. And there must have been, in total, 12, maybe more. I don't think there were much more than that in the whole of Rhodesia at that stage, but obviously they were all used for the op to fly guys out.
Actually, there were nearly 50, and I think 30 of them were South Africans. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we flew in. Where we landed was on a tea estate. You could see the house in the distance, mostly about 500-600 meters away. But the area we had, where we had the landing zone, was quite big. It was open area on the top of the hill. And there were quite a few people there. And my jaw dropped, because all the locals in the areas, these are the people on the farms, the people who stay close by, had all come in to support us. And they had set out trestle tables, and they had set out food, and there was cold drink and milk. I remember drinking milk out of a glass, and it just, your heart just does something, because it's never something I experienced anywhere else before. Just one of those things. And then a certain general in the army by the name of Peter Walls, he was one of the guys who was handing out stuff to us. He said, "Thank you, men. My heartfelt appreciation." You know what that did to me? It makes me quite emotional.
I feel very emotional listening to this. It's just
just to have that support. And I didn't think it was a great op, a big op that we did. In fact, I think a failure, not meeting the objectives that we had set. But just that, and then people coming up to say, "Are you okay? Is there anything else we can do?" The owners of the farm wanted to take the people into the house to go and shower and bath, and the guy said, "No, they're not going to let the guys go in there, because they'll just abuse it and make a mess of it." But that was the op, and it just, for me, it touched me in so many ways. And you know, sometime later, I had to drive down. It was over the Christmas period, and I had to go down to go and pick up some spares in the area, because there was a problem with what we did. And I met a lot of the people that were there. And just, you know, when you meet the locals and people that have something to fight for, but it's on their turf, It's a different thing to what was happening in South Africa, because the mentality was it's on the border. It's far away. It's not here. Until the ANC got closer and there was a lot of stuff that was happening in our towns and big places like the Sasol, what you call it, petroleum plants and so on.
Yeah.
But it's a different feel. People take ownership of you. They acknowledge you for what you are. It's not something far away. You are part and parcel, and part of it is say thank you. Thank you for doing what you're doing to keep us safe. And it touched me forever. It will always be with me.
Yeah, they're very. I'm not just saying this because I was born and grew up there, but special people. By and large, some of them were arseholes and pain in the arse, but by and large, they were just wonderful people.
And all of them had family who were involved in some way or another, especially the elders had sons and daughters who were serving. Some of them had lost sons and daughters in that as well. And even those who weren't serving, I mean, they hit ambushes and things like that there as well. They knew what it was like. And hey, it was a big touching moment for me. Maybe it affect other guys, but for me, when Peter Walls gave me a can of Coke like that, it's just, I mean, you don't see that elsewhere.
Wow. You know, Greg, I've watched 252 interviews now, and I've been trying to get the human feel, the essence of what happened in these actions. And a lot of guys just say, oh, you know, I went to Op Urick, and you struggle to get anything out of them. But the way you've painted this picture is exactly what I've been looking for. It's absolutely beautiful, because I'm a writer, I'm an author of 3 books. And I love the written word. I've got a very vivid imagination, and you need to paint pictures when you're telling these stories. Otherwise, they're just dry and bland. And I think that talk about the helicopters coming in and the people feeding you, I've really got a lump in my throat, and I'm not putting on an act. Just beautiful, evocative story. Thank you.
There was one thing missing from that, and I'm saying it a bit tongue in cheek: the Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner that was played in the movie Apocalypse. It's funny, that was missing for me, and I thought if anything, picture perfect, but it's not picture perfect, it's real life, but it's just one of those things, and often I think of that, and I happened to catch a snippet of that the other day, and immediately it took me back to Op Snoopy. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's just one of...
Greg, so far it's been a really fascinating story. I'm just so enjoying it, and I'm sure the audience will when they get to hear it. We're going to move on to one of your other many ops that you actually did, and that's Op Urick, which you South Africans called bootlace. And that was blowing up bridges and causing hassle to the routes leading to Rhodesia for Zanda. And you decided to blow up bridges and blah, blah, blah. And I think it also involved the attack on Mapai, where the Puma 164 was shot down.
At Barajim, yeah. At
Barajim. So, yeah. Well, that was actually the South African... No, it was a cheetah. That was what we called a cheetah that was shot down at Barajim, going in to rescue an injured guy. But let's, you know the story better than I do. If you could just pick it up from when you first heard about it.
Okay, so we were briefed that we were going to continue with more operations, and there was going to be a big operation coming up in Mozambique. And our role in Urick, it's funny, I refer to it as Urick and not as bootlace. There's maybe something in there. Our brief was that we were going to target the bridges all leading from the coast up to Mapai, where the big battle, Mapai and Barajim, where the eventual big battle took place. And so we were tasked to identify a number of the bridges on the main roads coming up. Now, this is quite far up the coast from Maputo, but they're going inland. And when I say inland, we were not right on the coast, but we were far enough inland where, because it's pretty much coastal terrain, or flood, what do they call it, flood terrain near the coastal area. But it's all very sandy, a lot of marshes and so on there, because obviously this is where the rivers open up and you start getting these wide river deltas there. So we were broken up into various teams to target a number of strategic bridges, most of them on tar roads leading to the interior. And by demolishing these bridges, we would hamper Frelimo primarily, and then Zandla in terms of suppliers that would be going inland from the coast, from where they were getting their supplies. So we were flown out in Bell helicopters, Bell 205s, teams of 6, each Bell was initially the grouping, but often what happened then was because you needed more men on a particular bridge, especially the bridge was bigger, they decided what they would do. They split us 3 teams, so a group of 18 of us over 2 Bells, 205s. So we flew in. We started, I think, on the northernmost bridge first. Came in and landed. So it's funny, you're flying in, and because it's so flat, it looks like rice paddies. You know, maybe they are, but it's very flat coastal, flat terrain area. And we flew in, and yeah, you're flying over villages, and the villagers are waving at you and so on. It's quite a weird situation like it. You feel when you're going into somebody else's thing. It reminded me of the coastal area of Durban. And all the way down on, the south and the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. That's what it reminded me of in many respects. It's a similar type of terrain.
But once again, it's the sort of flying low over the rice paddies. All that was missing was the straw hats and the iconic music.
That was missing.
That was missing. Apocalypse now.
So we flew in, and it's very strange because you're coming to land on a road, which is a normal commercial road in a province. There are no guards or anything like that there because it's not a military checkpoint or anything like that. And the vehicle's moving up and down. So your first point is to stop the vehicles, which we did. So we had stopper groups go out on either side to stop the vehicles. So we dressed in, I can't remember what our dress was. I don't think we were in Rhodesian fatigues. I think we were dressed in greens.
And was that a combined operation with Rhodesians, or once again you'd separated into?
No, it was combined operation. There were many arms to this as well. So the other guys were designated with going to Barajim, where they were. I think it is Barajim, where they were going to take out I think there was a what you call it, radar installation, a whole lot of other stuff there, but they need to go and take out the bridge. There's a whole lot that need to be done. And so everybody had different roles and responsibilities. We knew that they were doing something else, but we had our task to fulfill. So we had 3 bridges that we had to take out or eliminate. And so we did the first bridge. So when we flew in, as I mentioned, you debus, the first guys go out, they clear the area, make sure no vehicles come in. And as soon as you got an armed guy with a rifle and so on, the vehicles tend to stop or they turn around and they go, which happens. So, and to lay the charges takes a lot longer. Most of the bridges are normally concrete and steel girder bridges. It means you got to get in underneath the bridge. You got to put cutting charges onto the steel girders, and it takes a bit of preparation. So we'd done some preparation before, so a lot of the stuff was really, I wouldn't say pre-packed, but easier to do. But still, it took time because you can't always reach the girders. You go underneath there, and it's too high, and you got to climb up embankments and so on. So, and you had limited time. First of all, a limited space in the helicopters to carry all of this equipment. Different to an operation that I had done sometime before called Backlash, where we blew up a tunnel, but we practiced for 3 months and we took in a whole lot of stuff with us. We also had scaffolding and we had various other things to do. We planned this meticulously and we could do it. We could get the charges where we wanted. But when you're going in on short notice and they give you 2 weeks or whatever lead time, and you don't have access to all of the equipment you need, you do what you can. Anyway, so we set out to do the 3 bridges. So we did the one day, and then we were going to do the other 2 the next day, if I recall correctly. So we blew the first one. It was the charges were enough to cut the beams underneath that were supporting. They weren't big bridges. When I say in length from one side to the other, maybe 20 meters. It's not big, but the embankment on the other side and where they cut it, there was no other place for vehicles to cross through or to go around. They would have to build a Bailey bridge, or they'd have to rebuild that bridge to do it. So it's
also, for people who are interested in logistics like I am, blowing a 20-meter bridge sort of seems pointless in a way because it's a temporary thing to fix. But the fact is they couldn't go around to the left or the right because it was just swamp everywhere. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. It was actually, there was water and there's swamp. Yeah. The other thing too is that the Frelimo government, on whom Zandla was dependent, were not really equipped to do a lot of this. This was built in the Portuguese era. and was part of the whole engineering planning of these routes and so on. So the Chinese and the Russians were supporting, I think more so the Russians, sorry, my correction, were supporting Frelimo at this stage and so on. And to get somebody in to come and build a bridge would take ages to do. So it wouldn't prevent them entirely. I mean, they could mostly lay girders and so on across, but not big enough for vehicles and so on to go over. So they would have to find another route. So really it was a tactical decision to blow these up, to hamper the delay of suppliers going to the western side of Mozambique to the Rhodesian border. They could find other routes around. They could eventually find dirt roads, and it would be longer routes. But we were hampering them no less.
There was actually another global reason. Sorry to interrupt, Rick. There was another global reason in terms of the war there to stop the inflow in the southeast. Is because there was nowhere inland that was high enough to put up OPs. And the strategy was to try and push the TERS up into the north, coming in through Matari and in Yanka and all that sort of stuff, where there are ample observation points and far easier to attack.
Yeah. I think part of it too, that I think there's also the tribal structure of the people living in that part of Mozambique and South Africa. For them, the border is just a river you got to cross. There's no checkpoint and passport control or anything like that. That's number one. So you find people move backwards and forwards. It's pretty rural out there. It's very basic. If you've ever driven through that area, there's not much of anything in terms of call it infrastructure that you would come to understand with first world and third world countries. It's very basic. And when you get further out, you might have a railway track, and that's the only sort of modern thing. Otherwise, they're dirt roads. Anyway, so when you blow one of these bridges, there's quite a bit of charge that's going off, and obviously you use a number of detonation devices like T-bones or dog bones and things like that to give a delay, because what you want to do, you want to blow the girders, the steel girders first, so that they break, and then you put a big charge on, which would then damage the concrete and cement structure, and you blow that away. If you blow at the same time, often it's still left standing. So you use these devices to be able to blow effectively. So demolitions is something that we all had to specialize in or do a basic and advanced course in, and then you can go and specialize later. So we all had a pretty good understanding of how it worked. The military has a way of, they have a rule of thumb. So that when you're out in the bush or anywhere and you've got to work on something, they've got a way that you work the basic calculation, and the military always doubles that. Just to make sure that it happens. And guess what happens? People like us that are there think that's the rule of thumb that you're going to do, and what you do, you add a little bit more extra to that as well. So we, on the first bridge, when we debussed from the helicopter, we had our stopper fields. The guys went underneath. Now, I wasn't part of the team that went underneath. We had other people who were designated. I was in the top controlling one of the stopper groups, but I was closer to the bridge, so I could man and see both. And you see vehicles coming along, and they're driving along, and then they're not too sure. Then they see it's a white face in a green uniform, and the guy's looking quite menacing, so they slow down, and then they think twice, and some of them reverse, some of them stop, or invariably they turn around and they go back. They do a 3-point turn, because invariably those roads are raised in the flood plains as well. So you find that they do a 3-point turn and they turn around and go back. So that was fine on the first day when we blew up the bridge, but there was shrapnel and concrete flying all over the place. I remember we were sitting in a stormwater gully on the side, and a piece of steel about the size of a bicycle came over us, and it just embedded in the concrete below. But I mean, it went in deep, like 2 meters in, and there was a long piece of thing. I mean, it was just like striking a frisbee. Anyway, so we did the first one. It took a lot longer than we thought. The helicopter had offloaded us and had flown back to a holding area because we didn't know how long it was going to take. We then called it, came back, picked us up after the demolition of the bridge, and we flew back to a holding area where we would all be. And we thought it was going to be safe. Well, from the aerial photographs, it was an island in a marsh. Great if you love mozzies and things like that, except this was dry season. The marsh had dried up. So what we thought was marsh was just short grass like this, and very, very dry clay type soil. When it dries, it starts cracking up like it underneath, a lot of it. And some places the grass was a bit longer. Then we got to where there was thatch grass and so on. So we're in the middle of this island. So the guy said, we've got to dig trenches because there's no other place for us to really stay. Dig a trench or scraping for yourself, and the ground was rock hard. So I think I went down about this deep, and then hopefully the soil on the side would help. It's just we didn't have the equipment with us. We were using our knives and things like that to really dig trenches. We weren't prepared for this. Busy setting up the camp where we were based. So we had quite a few people there and the helicopters in the middle. And we get a call on the radio from the RLI that were close to us. They were sort of more south of us. They said there's some enemy in the area. They're approaching, they're coming through the thorn trees and they're entering the grass to where we are. We need to do something. And we were the closest. So we just dropped our stuff, put on our fighting kit, and started moving forward. I was carrying RPD at this stage. And so we lined up, went into line abreast, and we're walking through this grass. And the feeling that you get when you do this, because you don't know what is coming. You can't see anything. And I've had it a few times before where you're walking through the long grass and you feel and you know that somebody can see you. If a guy's a good shot, he can take a pot shot, and you'd be the first guy to go. But, you got to have faith in your hands. As I said to you earlier, which was part of the conversation, my faith in God and my Christian walk is important to me now, more so than it was then. And I know that I still believe in God, but I don't have the same relationship with him now as I had then. Today, it's very much different. But you're still apprehensive, and you're walking with the other guys, and you're part of a chain. You can't be the weakest link to give in. And people say, but aren't you scared? Oh, yes, you are. You are, because you don't know what's going to happen. But what carries you is your teammates are going to carry you. You know your training is going to carry you. You know your weaponry is going to carry you. And you now have the ability because you are now ready and primed and ready to go. And it's a big thing. That camaraderie and these are guys I've worked with a lot. You know what you're going to be doing. So as we were walking forward, all of a sudden the guy said, there. And as you did that, you could see the guys coming up and they were taking shots at us, but it was uncoordinated. I don't think they planned it. There must have been about 10 or 12 of them. Here there were a lot more of us. I think there were about 14, 18 of us in an extended line. And we immediately kicked over into fire and movement. And our fire and movement is very aggressive. I mean, you work on a buddy-buddy system. You're keeping your line abreast, and you get up, and as you get up and run, your mate next to you is firing, keeping the guy's head down. And as you hit the dirt, he's coming up and he's going. You don't have to wait. It's not waves that is coordinated like a ballet, but everything moves. There was a captain from the RLI who was standing on an ant-heap about 300-400 meters to our right-hand side, and he'd seen what was going on. And he was trying to yell something, and he got shot in the leg by one of these guys. He went down in like a bag of suds. We didn't see this, only came out later. But we did this fire and movement action, and there were some guys to the right of us, and I think they were RLI. They got left so far behind. I just think that the difference in training and as we work collectively as a team, we just went forward, and we went through these guys. And we had quite a few kills. I think one guy got away. I think he was injured, but he got away, but we eliminated them. Now, obviously, it's a problem because if somebody gets away, like you see in any operation, they can go to their local base or they can tell somebody and they can bring in the heavy armament. So, of course, now we were a bit concerned. But I think the guy was injured badly enough not to be able to go very far. Maybe he didn't make it. So we then came back. We regrouped. We then had people doing patrols going around because we wanted to make sure that that was fine. So well into the night, the next morning, we had patrols the whole night to make sure that everything was secure because the next day we'd be doing some more bridges. That night, the mosquitoes came to visit. I was lying in my shell hole. I had a face veil over me, and I'm lying under a thin parachute sleeping bag made from parachute materials, just enough to cover you. And your face is on the face veil on your face. The more you're just doing this, you just hear this high-pitched, constant frequency sound like a radio that's not on station all the time. And the mosquitoes love me. They love me, but yeah, we got bitten, but it wasn't so bad. Early the next morning, we then got up. We went to get ready to take on the other two bridges. We were split into two teams. One team went to the one bridge, and I was on the other team, went to another bridge. Bigger bridge this time. Moving more south, so a lot more people in the area. I think we're the furthermost south of all the bridges. Anyway, we set up, landed, debussed from helicopter took off, and our team commander, Martin Natolovitz, a young lieutenant, was with us. He was controlling what was going on. He wasn't part of the demolition team. We had guys who were going under to set up the charges. It was a slightly longer bridge, but it was narrower, and it wasn't made of that much of concrete. A lot of steel railing on the side and so on. So it was quite an elementary bridge to go underneath to do it. And even some of those old bridges even have wood underneath, because often they use the existing thing and they build over that. So here's a funny scene. So we're sitting there, and there's a truck coming down from the other side. And we want the truck to stop, but the truck driver is a bit stubborn. He wants to continue driving, and he's driving along, chugging along the road like us. So one of the guys next to us, an RPD, fired a few shots. So he was lying prone on the RPD on the tripod, bipod, and he took all those shots with this thing, and the truck stopped. You see, and then the guy decided, no, he's going to continue coming, so he fired a lot more at him. He decided, nah, I'm going to carry on driving. So Mark said to one of the guys, I think it's time for the RPG. He's a guy called Tommy Thomas, came out of the RPG, forgot to tell Mark he's firing now because he blew one of Mark's eardrums, because when he flew back in the helicopter, the fluid was running out of his ear. Anyway, fired at the truck coming down. And the first shot went straight for the truck, but sometimes what happens, I think the fins, and as it's coming straight at like it did this, missed the truck completely. And I think the guy's eyes were just this big, and because the truck ground to a halt, like the doors flew open, the guy turned around and ran. Quickly primed the RPG and fired. The second round hit the truck in the front and the nose, detonated and so on. Blew up the bridge, and then we flew back after the helicopter picked us up to where we were going to get together at our assembly point where we had been for the night. And we were there at the assembly point, and now we're on standby, ready to go up to go and assist the other guys on standby. So now we're listening on the radio, and this is when we heard that the helicopter had been hit. This Charlie Small and the guys, the engineers, were on board that helicopter that went down. I can't tell you what it feels like when you feel absolutely helpless. And we knew a lot of those guys. We got to know them over a period of time. And obviously there were some of the South African guys, the pilots and so on. We didn't know them, but we knew that they were there to support it. And obviously that whole thing went south from there onwards. It was just such bad news. And when something like it happens, the feeling of, I wouldn't say dread and despair, but I wouldn't say futility, because war is futile in the long run. You think about everything that you've done, and you think why? Because often it's a political decision. You look at what happened to Rhodesia and Lancaster House, irrespective of how good you were and how good the fighting men of Rhodesia were. Lancaster House sealed the fate of Rhodesia, which was very sad. And here in a situation like this, where you hear what has happened, and the guys are speechless. You don't hear any chatter on the radio, and then you hear guys calling for help and this and that, but it's not direction from the operational commander. Look, it came through about 2 or 3 minutes later. They was then starting to redirect traffic and to go and help, see if they couldn't help and pick up the bodies if there was anything they could do. But the guys were under fire as well at that stage, so it was really, really difficult. So that's my contribution towards Ops Urick that I can retell at this stage. It's not, I wasn't in the fire with the guys in the front, but we did our small share.
Wow, that's really interesting. And then at the end of that, you went back to your collection point, and then you flew back to which part of Rhodesia? Somewhere in Cheretse?
We were at Mabalahuta.
Mabalahuta.
But I think, if I recall correctly, we flew back to Buffalo Range because it was the closest from here to Reasonable. And then from Buffalo Range we went back to
the Red Ants.
Yeah. And we collected our stuff, because then we were also being told, because of what was happening, it was within a few days of the peacekeeping forces that were coming in, and we told that we had to get out of the country sooner rather than later. They didn't want to be caught with other people through Rhodesian soil, even though I think people were aware of what was happening. And then from there we flew to Salisbury, and we were expecting to come back again in a military capacity, but it didn't happen, which was really sad. And I left with a longing. It's funny, there's certain things that you miss when you go back. It's funny, I kept a lot of the coins, the old big coin like that. I used it as a golf marker for many years. I miss the bacon. Do you remember the bacon we used to get there?
The best bacon in the world. I've traveled the world. I've yet to eat bacon like that. The bacon here in England, literally, you can put a kilo in a pan and it's all water, and there's no flavor. But there was just something about it, magnificent meat.
And do you remember Lobels, who
Yeah,
used to do,
the bread.
yeah. So I just, it's funny, those are the things that you miss.
You know, that bread never used to go stale. We used to leave it in our bread bin in the kitchen for 4 days, and it was as fresh as the day we bought it.
They mixed a bit of cement in with it. But it's sort of things like that. And I left when we flew back. I was under the impression that it'd be a temporary thing to go back to Rhodesia, but it was. I did go back a few years later, but was in a civilian capacity. It wasn't the same. And my heart still lies there. I did a lot of work a few years back when I was based in Lusaka in Zambia. And for the business that I was charged with setting up and running, I had to go and spend some time in what is now Harare. It's a form of itself. I drove past what was the RLI barracks, and now it's the Zimbabwe regiment, and the road going to the airport. It's just very sad. Yeah, and my heart longs for that, but it won't be like that again. We have to remember it like it was Rhodesia.
Absolutely. It's, a great nation of people sold down by the banksters and the mobsters, and that's all it is. Corruption on a global level. And I'm afraid it's going to come back and bite the West in the face. Not just what they did to us, but the way they're just allowing all sorts of critters to run countries. Well, I understand it from a Christian perspective, from end time study and eschatology and all that. But yeah, what a mess. In closing, it's been a really fascinating talk, Greg. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What would you say defines a special forces soldier? What's, if you put it in a dictionary, what is a special forces soldier? It's more than just a guy who can slink along in the bush and blow up things. How would you define a special forces soldier?
It's quite a broad term, if you define it. And if you look at soldiers of this class around the world, they're all different to some degree or another, because your environment, your theater of operation, and the demands placed on you vary slightly. But if you all round and encompassing, like the SAS were, whether it's land, sea, or air, working in small teams or slightly or larger teams to be able to do that, skill and tenacity and training plays a big part, without a doubt. The equipment is part and parcel of that as well. The better you are equipped, the more capable you are, to a degree. Because I think if you start relying too much on equipment and not on your own skills or your team skills and that ability, it's that give and take point that you got to say, well, are we totally dependent on indirect fire we have to call in from elsewhere, or if you have to do escape and evasion to get out of a situation, what is better? And I know it's nicer to have all that firepower, and I'm not picking on the Americans, but the Americans utilize a lot of that firepower. They're able to do so. We didn't have that in any way whatsoever, whether here or in Rhodesia. You had maybe some aircraft support, but quite often your planning was so meticulous to say, guys, you've got nothing. It's your skill and your ability. And that makes you ingenious. That gives you the tenacity. But your training and your team collective effort is what pulls you together to make you work. We've seen these movies of Rambo and people like that. A special forces soldier is not a Rambo. He's not a guy who's bristling in muscles. In fact, most of the guys, size-wise, for my size, maybe a little bit bigger or smaller, I'm 6 foot, or 183 centimeters for those who work in the metric system. The most important part is that tenacity and that will and that desire. I mean, I was told that I was never going to finish our selection course, and yet I did. And I know guys who've done other selection courses. I know some guys who've done the South African Special Forces selection twice because they were out for too long, and the guy said, you're not capable of doing it. But if you also look at the SAS selection, and I'm talking about in the UK, and I'm talking in Rhodesia. In the UK, it was quite individual, where they're on the Brecon Downs, where they do their long individual marches and so on. I think to a lesser degree, and I stand corrected here, but the Rhodesian SAS was slightly different in terms of, and they relied very much more on teams. And I think working as a team you're never as good as a team. You don't have all that capability, and you don't have a 360 all-round capability any time of the day. And having team members around who are like you, who are dependent on you as you are dependent on them, makes you stronger. It is a weakness in some ways too, but let's look at the positives here. They make you stronger, they motivate you. And when times are tough, often that's the guy who's going to say, just hold in there, just hang on, we're going to be able to get through this. Or sometimes your words of encouragement or an idea to say, let's do this or let's do that. And you got to be a thinking man soldier. That's the big difference between conventional and other soldiers, that as a special forces soldier, you have to be able to think, and sometimes think on your feet. Often there's a plan, but you can't follow the plan because plan is made in the ops room and in training. But when you're on the ground, things change, and you have, and sometimes they're not good, and sometimes you gotta make the call based on what information you have at your disposal, circumstances, and also sometimes your team. And as a team leader, it's more difficult. And I've seen guys who have been team leaders on teams of 6, and they're not necessarily an officer. I've seen guys who are senior NCOs, non-commissioned officers, the rank of the sergeant, staff sergeant, lead teams very capably because they have the fighting skill. They know what the bush is like. It's something, it's like it's in them. It's that spirit that you've got in you to be able to do that. And a good special forces soldier is the person who adapts to the environment, to the circumstances, and despite the odds that are stacked against them, are still able to go out and do what is done and asked to do what has been requested of them or part of their mission brief. But sometimes it changes, and you say, I couldn't get that, but you know what? I did this, and I did this, and I did that because we couldn't do that. And you might get castigated for that, but the fact that you thought on your feet and you still did what you had to go and do, it might have been in another way. That's what makes it. And I think the other component is you've got to have a belief in something. I see that today, and it's missing. I can say without a doubt that before we went out on an operation, and I'm talking from my experience in special forces in South Africa, at 1 RECCE and at 2 RECCE, and to a lesser degree with the SAS. And I'm not knocking, it's just, I think, circumstantial. Before we went on an operation, we used to huddle together, and someone would read the Bible, and we would pray. Now, are we better than anybody else? No. But you pray and you ask for guidance, and you ask that you do the right thing, and you look after your comrades that are with you. And when you come back, you get back, people even before they put their kit down, the guys come together and say, thank you, Lord, for guiding us. And I think that for me is one of the biggest things in terms of being a soldier and committed to what you do. We're not mercenaries. We're soldiers who fought for the belief of our country or the greater cause. Like the South Africans went to Rhodesia, and why? Because they were fighting the onslaught of the communists in whatever format, whether it's ANC, ZIPRA, ZANLA, you name it. It could be any of those, because they were all puppets under Russia and under China as part of the greatest communist onslaught and the plan for in Africa. So that's what you feel. I worked in a lot of other countries as well, working from South Africa in undercover, doing the things we need to do later on. Still was exactly the same MO, same thoughts and so on. It's not necessarily something you're going to write home about and say, oh, we were wonderful, we were great. Sometimes what you did was negligible. It might have been information gathering. But what we did was for the greater cause. And I believe that we did the right thing, because if we didn't do anything about it, I think the rule of communist led governments would be far more pronounced. It would have happened a lot sooner. Absolutely. I know what's happening in Zimbabwe, and I know what's happening in South Africa at the moment. Some I don't agree with, but that would have been on our doorstep a long, long time ago, not where it is now. And you wouldn't be sitting in England now where you're sitting now, Tony, because of that.
Yeah, Greg, I agree with you 100% that communist countries would be a lot further than they are at the moment. There was something about the dominoes dropping when Rhodesia got taken out. It seemed to be more profound than other countries like Angola or wherever else. Something almost in the spiritual realm happened in my mind. But moving on beyond that, in conclusion, would you like to give us a little talk about your movement or your involvement in the MOS and that another organization, I believe?
Yes, for sure. After I left my military career, when I served permanent force, I did a period of 7 years. I left and then went over to territorial, as they would call it in Rhodesia, or citizen force in South Africa, and I joined up with the guys from RECCE. So RECCE is primarily a citizen or territorial force regiment, or it was, closed in 1991, and I served with them all the way until it closed in 1991. Did quite a number of operations. Loved the time that I was there, but you're also getting on. You have other requirements. You're in civilian um, life, and you've got a career and things like that you also need to focus on.
Yeah.
And anybody will tell you, if you look at what's happening in Israel, the guys are taking strain, because if you're not generating income and earning your bread and butter, what's going to happen? It's all good for God and the fatherland, but there's also more to it than that.
Absolutely.
So I didn't do very much after I'd left. The Special Forces decided they wanted to set up an association, which they did. So they set up the South African Special Forces League with various chapters in different locations or provinces. I headed up the one in Johannesburg. It was called Fort Hunter. I did that for a period of 2 years before I stood down and somebody else took over. Now, while it was called a fort, all our operational bases were called fort. So whether it was Fort Rev or Fort Foot or whatever it might have been, so we just carried that through into the league. The league then changed its designation and became an association because of legal entities and registration and tax compliances and various other things. So they changed it to the South African Special Forces Association. I'm still an active member there with Fort Hunter. So this is many years down the line. And our role and objective is really to help people who've fallen on hard times, especially today, where you've got a lot of the people are our age who are now not just fathers, but grandfathers too, in many respects. A lot of them are not equipped. And when I say not equipped, because of age, maybe health, maybe qualifications, and the changing demands of what's happening in the world, they're not equipped to be able to handle that. And financially, a lot of them have been struggling. During COVID, we were very active, and we helped a lot of people who really either got sick or fell into hard times. And we had private people within the organization who got aircraft to go and fly people in for medical service and care, or for food or whatever. So that's part and parcel of it. I did mention to you that my father had been in the Air Force and had served in North Africa and in Italy. And he was my hero. And for all of the years, I always remember what he stood for and what he did. And I think the military background gives us a backbone. It gives us something in terms of value and honor. And I don't mean we're patting ourselves on the back and we have big egos, but it's what we stand for in terms of the greater good and for our fellow man and fellow woman alongside us. And he joined the Moths. For those who don't know, it's the Men of the Order of Tin Hats. And that was established after World War I, if I'm correct. Yes, after World War I. And my father was a Moth in two Moth shell holes. The clubs, they call them, are shell holes. He had one in Nelspruit in Mpumalanga. Then he moved to one in White River. Then he moved back again to the one in Nelspruit again because he was getting older and they provided accommodation. So that's part and parcel of what we do to be able to support people. But I wasn't a member of the Moths. I was interested in joining where he was. I'm based in Johannesburg. He's based down there. It wouldn't work. So somebody I knew from one of the local Moth shell holes here approached me and said, wouldn't I be interested? And I said, no, not yet. And I sort of put it off. I didn't think it was of value. Then my father was getting quite old. He was already then 89 or 90. And his health in terms of age was failing him a bit. He was getting forgetful and he would leave the stove on. He didn't want to bath every day. He was not looking after himself. And remotely, it's very difficult to look after either of your parents or any loved one. So we brought him up here, found a place for him. So we put him into an old age home, which is very close by. We could see him on a regular basis. and he was still a moth. On a Wednesday night, I happened to go around there, and he was dressed in his moth uniform. He said, "We're going off tonight." And I said, "Dad, we're not going off tonight." He said, "No, but there are moths here. I want to go." So I took him to the local shell hole where the guys were all together, and they were only too excited to see him. I mean, here's a guy who was then 91 or 92 in his full moth regalia. And it inspired me because the then chairman of the moths, or what we call the old bull, had said to me he would like me to just join up, which I then did. And it changes your perspective because it's about everybody who has served and about caring for others. There are a lot of people out there now. There are people our age. You talked about earlier on about communicating. There are people our age out there who are the fathers and husbands to their family members. And I know quite a few who cannot talk about anything. They have what I would refer to as a post or delayed PTSD. They struggle to communicate. They struggle to be a functioning member. Sorry about that. To be a functioning member of society and somebody in the family. They're just not able to do that. And these are the people we try to draw and to pull in. So we have people from the police service. We have people from the artillery, from the infantry, from various other services. And these are all people who have contributed and now are contributing to help others. The value of the moths is to be able to, I mean, there are 5 value platforms that you stand on, but it's also we will remember them, those who passed before us, for what they gave. We might not necessarily agree with everything, but remember that they stood for the freedom that we have today. You have that all around the world. To remember our veterans. It was a sad thing for me last year on Veterans Day. There's a big plinth, or like the Arc de Triomphe in France. There's a big one here in Johannesburg near the zoo at the War Museum. And we had a parade there, and this was just on Veterans Day. And at sunset, it's called the Sunset Parade. We walk past the plinth, and our shadows then fall onto the plinth, and you can see this as we're walking past. And it was quite an emotional moment, not for me, but for others as well, because on the plinth itself, on the inside, are all the people who died in World War I, whose names are written on there. So they carved out, chiseled out in the sandstone. But then you've got everybody else who's around there. And when we'd finished, we were standing there, and the guys were talking and said, "Do you know, at the end of World War II in 1945, when they had the march past at the War Museum, there were 4,700 men just at that parade marching past. Today, I don't even think there are 4,700 men in the whole of South Africa who are part of the moths. Now, those are all members of the moths at that stage. I don't think they're even that in the whole of Southern Africa, and I'm including places like Zambia as well, where they have representation too. So sadly, I think we're the last of a generation. You touched on it earlier when we weren't being recorded, but I think we need to leave a legacy for those that follow in our footsteps. Somebody might look at this interview years from now and say, what an idiot he was. He gave up everything like that. But, I gave it up for others. I believed in what I was doing and what we were doing because we had a common cause. We had a common value. And, for me, God is still the most important thing in my life. He wasn't then, but he had bigger plans for me. And that's how I'm going to end it.